It's time to start your morning by taking 5. Here's your host, Matt McMaster.
You're listening to Take 5, a quick 5-minute take on the biggest things happening in Nebraska sports. I am your host, Matt McMaster, and today we are talking about Michigan State Week. The Spartans travel this weekend on Saturday at 3 o'clock on FS1 to take on the Nebraska Cornhuskers at 3 p.m. Nebraska opens up as a 10.5-point favorite. We'll get into this one. It'll just be a quick little preview, just some, slight X's and O's, and then also what are the stakes of this game and what am I in particularly looking for. First and foremost, it's quite incredible the talent in the Big Ten in terms of the quarterback position, just how much that has skyrocketed. And it definitely has had to do with the transfer portal. Julian Sayin transferring from Alabama over to Ohio State. You have a guy like Bryce Underwood who was committed to LSU, flipped his commitment to Michigan. Now you got a guy like Dylan Raiola, originally committed to Georgia, eventually flipped his commitment to Nebraska. And this week's quarterback, the Nebraska will play, Aiden Childs, is kind of a child of that. His head coach now, Jonathan Smith, was his head coach at Oregon State. And so Childs, the very highly touted prospect coming out of high school, kind of followed his head coach from OSU over to MSU. And last season, if you were watching Aiden Childs, there definitely were some tough moments. There were some, he's still young. He's still a sophomore. He's got a lot of work to do. He's got to be better in the pocket. He maybe use his mobility a little bit more. His accuracy needed to improve. He's made some pretty massive jumps from last season to this season. I watched his game against Youngstown State, watching his game against USC. It was impressive, not only his arm and his athleticism, but just how much he's grown. Last year, he was listed at 217 pounds. This year, he's bulked up to 225. You can tell. He looks like a grown man out there. He's 6'3". On top of that, he does not have the breakout speed like Bryce Underwood does, just to use a reference, but he definitely can make you pay. And so, you kind of get into this in this interesting mix of quarterbacks that Nebraska's played at the Power 5 level, with Brendan Sorsby and Bryce Underwood both posing threats on the ground. Childs is exactly like that. Now, I would say that Childs is a more developed thrower than Bryce Underwood. And we'll get into later in the week, we'll get into some stats specifically about Michigan State. We'll save that for later. But I think that, this is going to be a regular occurrence in the Big Ten for Nebraska football. It just seems like week in and week out in this conference now, because of the shifting alignments of NIL and the transfer portal, that you're just going to consistently be playing one of the better quarterbacks in the country. Childs is definitely that. And the guy that Nebraska will play next week, Malik Washington, definitely on the rise as well for Maryland. So that's definitely the number one concern for Nebraska, the number one guy that you need to know, the number one dude that Nebraska is circling on their scouting report is Aiden Childs. He's an absolute dog. Now, let's talk about the stakes of this game. I think, for me, if Nebraska were to win this game, this would be a massive sign of progress. And I think that if Nebraska were to go 4-0 in the month of October, where they will more than likely end up being favorites in every single one of the games that they play, it will show massive amounts of progress. Because the problem of Nebraska football over the last couple of years, in my opinion, the biggest problem hasn't been the inability to beat ranked teams. The biggest problem has not been the inability to upset teams or win the big one or burst into tier 2 or tier 1 or get over a hump. Everyone has talked about Nebraska football, not everybody, but some people have talked about Nebraska football as if they got to get over the hump. They got to get over the hump. Michigan's the hump. They got to get over it. In my opinion, they got to get to the hump. They're not even at the hump yet. We're talking about a team that until last year hadn't had a winning season in over 8 years. So I don't even think they're even in the convo really yet of like they can't break through. They gotta earn the right to break through. And I think you earn the right to break through by beating a team like Michigan State, beating a team like Maryland, beating a team like Northwestern, beating a team like Minnesota. And it's been an incredibly interesting trend for Nebraska over the last couple of years. These games where they're favored, whether it be at home or on the road, but they are playing an opponent in the Big Ten that they really should beat, they've lost. Last year, they were a 9.5-point home favorite against Illinois. They lost that game. The same season, they were 7.5-point home favorite against UCLA. They lost that game. If you date back all the way to 2021, Nebraska football has lost 9 Big Ten regular season games where they end up losing, even though that they are a favorite. They've done it twice in 2024, twice in 2023, twice in 2022, and 3 times in 2021. And so this is a game we're favored by 10.5 points against a team that you are more talented than and that you have looked better than, quite frankly, over the last couple of weeks compared to the competition that they've played, that you should beat, and you should beat handily. Now, should Nebraska cover? I don't know. I think 10.5, in my opinion, is a little bit too high of a line. I think it probably, I honestly thought it would be closer to 5.5 to 7.5 as opposed to 10.5. But it is a game that Nebraska should control. It is a game that Nebraska should, in the second quarter, you're thinking, all right, it's going to be very hard for them to lose this game. They should be able to, especially at home, flex their dominance. And we'll get into more of the matchup as the week goes on, but this is, to me, the game that shows the most progress. You've had a good start to the season. You've started 3-1. You beat a Cincinnati team where that win, as the weeks go on, look better and better. And then on top of that, you did lose to Michigan, but you gave them a really good fight and only lost by 3 points. You have things going your way. And we've seen in the past with this program that as soon as things start to trend in a certain direction, it just gets flipped on its head, and they kind of revert back to, their woeful ways and shooting themselves in the foot and making silly decisions. I mean, look back at 2021. They go ahead, they play Michigan at home, one of the best teams in the country. They nearly beat them, and in the next 2 games, they are favored against Minnesota and Purdue, and they end up losing both. This is kind of similar to the fact where, they played Michigan very hard, and they beat a Cincinnati team that's pretty decent, and they dominated against 2 teams they should have dominated against. Now you had this expectation that they should easily beat Michigan State, a Big Ten opponent, at home. Will they do it? Will they actually come through, or will the expectation of them just being better than Michigan State leave them to not be as fully prepared for those Big Ten matchups, which we've seen in the past? And Nebraska football, while they are talented, are definitely not to the point where they can just show up for a football game and think they're going to win. They have a lot of steps to take before that occurs. But I think this game and a win would show that this program is heading toward the right direction in terms of not just a football perspective, but a culture perspective as well when it comes to playing teams that you should beat, which has been the biggest problem for Nebraska over the last couple of seasons. All right, well, that's been Take 5. I've been Matt McMaster.